Alright, let's talk here a little bit about first focal plane scopes. This don't get talked about probably enough. Now, leaves on a first focal plane scope may not be the best choice. Okay, leaves off, I think it's one of the grandest things ever was, especially shooting longer distance. Of course, I could use this night 4 scope I have with leaves on, but I would have to get reused to this rectal and this element nexus scope. And I don't like that. When I look through that scope, I know what I expect to see, okay? Makes a difference, you know. Pick up somebody else's gun you've never looked through it, you know, you're going to be somewhat, you know, disoriented. Well, anyway, this video here, first focal plane scopes. Now, yeah, they do a great job, you know, for holdover and for compensating for wind drift. Now, there's some guys out there there's some people already knows this, but let's say you had one of those Voodoo 22 long rifles, and you was like, and they shoot good from all accounts. Now, there's some other brands shoots good. There's some other brands out there shoots good. You could even use a CZ rifle. Let's say you wanted to go squirrel snapping. Okay, well, squirrels generally, you know, they do come out in the edges of fields, but a lot of your shooting, you know, they're in the woods probably more than they're in fields. So the old first focal plane scope, it'll tell you, you know, no matter where you're at with the power setting, when you look in there, the reticle will tell you how high you're holding over or under a target. Now, this scope here has adjustable turrets, and, you know, I'm not going to lie to you. I usually dial for elevation, and I use the reticle to hold for wind. But I can get away with it on this gun more so because it shoots so flat, okay? Out to 125 yards, you know, this gun is probably no more than 2 1/4 inches off the line of sight. Well, what happens if, let's say you had a Voodoo rifle or another good shooting 22 long rifle and you decided to go shoot squirrels out to 100 yards? It's very possible to do. This round in this HM2, from a wind standpoint, it and a 22 long rifle, wind-wise, they're affected about the same, I believe. But the trajectory is different. So what about this first focal plane scope? Well, what it can do for you, and here's where you could you could hurt yourself trying to snipe squirrels in the wild with a 22 long rifle at 80, 90, 100, even 125 yards. It's very doable. I've seen some of these Voodoo videos, boys. Now, most of the ammo you shoot that gets the grand accuracy, though, you're not shooting the supersonic stuff. You're shooting standard velocity. Okay, which means the trajectory, you know, it's not as flat as high velocity, but it's more accurate. And that's probably what you would be really going for, especially if you had a good first focal plane scope with some decent magnification. So with a 22 long rifle, you could do like I do with this scope. You could dial for elevation, but there's one problem with that. Let's say you're shooting a squirrel out there at 90 yards with a 22 long rifle. Well, if you use the reticle for your holdover, where the crosshair is where the bullet, remember, you're going to dial up at 100 yards. You're going to dial up about 8 MOA on a 50-yard zero, okay? So you would be holding 8 MOA high. But where the crosshair is where the bullet is going to be at a section of your shot. So when you raise that gun up, say you hold over a squirrel, 8 MOA at 100 yards. Okay. Well, when you do that, that crosshair at about 50 yards, that crosshair is 4 inches above your line of sight. Where the bullets, you know, that's the bullet travel. So you can actually use your first focal plane scope to judge your bullet path. So if you held 8 MOA over a 100-yard squirrel and you looked at your crosshair, and you're like, wait a minute, I've got obstruction in my crosshair. Now what you got to figure out is like, okay, what range is that obstruction? What range is it? Is that obstruction at 50 yards that you're seeing in that scope? Well, if it is, you're probably not going to make contact with your squirrel. Your bullet's going to strike that limb. So you either A, have to move, or B, wait for the game to move. Because there's no tricks to making a gun. You know, you can't change the trajectory on a gun, you know. Not a rimfire powder burn. Now, maybe you could on a PCP if you could adjust the power on it, but you can't do it on, you know, on a powder burn. Assuming you're shooting the same, you know, the same ammo, shot to shot. So that's one of the benefits of a first focal plane scope, is it'll actually show you obstruction. Especially shooting a gun that's got more arc. Now, it'll show me obstruction with this gun here. For example, I shot that groundhog at 156 yards. Now, I've killed squirrels with this gun that far, too. So if I look up through the crosshair and I'm dialed up 4 3/4, I've shot some at 4 MOA. So if I raise the gun up 4 MOA and I see something in the crosshair, it's like, wait a minute, okay, where is that? Because that bullet is going to pass mighty close to that crosshair during a section of its flight. So if I take my laser, for example, and at about 60 yards is where the limb is, where that crosshair is cutting a bigger limb, I'm not going to make contact with that squirrel. I'm going to hit it. Just something for you to think about. I hope you enjoyed.